Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Radislav Sabo, Slovak television. Mr. Prime Minister, perhaps I could follow up on that question regarding energy. To what extent would this alternative of gas transit from Turkey and through other countries be economically advantageous or disadvantageous for Slovakia compared to the one we are used to regarding gas via Ukraine? And perhaps a sub-question, is the issue of transit via Ukraine already definitively closed, or will negotiations continue?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Editor. I want to have respect for the Ukrainian side, and I always show it during meetings. The Slovak Republic shows this by providing great assistance to Ukraine and the Slovak government by joint negotiations. You know that I am interested in meeting with President Zelensky to talk to him about one single topic, and that is the topic of stopping gas transit through Ukraine, which has caused Slovakia and the entire European Union enormous damage. We initiated this meeting in connection with Davos, where I could not go today because it is rather for the National Council, and there is a vote of confidence or no confidence in the government. But it is simply not possible for someone to send you a record of a meeting in advance that did not take place, and someone asks you to sign the record. And that recording contained everything that I had never even discussed with President Zelensky in my life. And there was one sweeping sentence that Ukraine was ready to talk about some kind of energy cooperation with Slovakia. But from Ukraine's perspective, that energy cooperation could also be perceived as us supplying them with electricity. It is incredibly important, and we have also paid attention to this with the Prime Minister of Hungary, dear Viktor, how the peace negotiations in Ukraine will turn out. Whether Ukraine will be a sovereign state, or whether Ukraine will become a territory where the interests of the great powers will be shared. This will also determine whether the transit can continue or not. We, the Slovak Republic, have an eminent interest in continuing transit through Ukraine towards Slovakia. Not to mention that this transit also enables the transit of gas other than Russian, and also maintaining the transit route through Ukraine allows Ukraine, which talks about its own gas reserves, to export this gas from its own territory towards the West in the future. Therefore, my interest in meeting with President Zelensky remains valid, but it seems to me that both the EU and Ukraine, and the Prime Minister named it very accurately, as if they don't understand what's going on in this world. And as for the first part of your question, Mr. Editor, I would add that Slovakia has a contract with Gazprom for the supply of gas at certain prices, and today the only flow of Russian gas that goes to Europe is the flow through Turkey. Therefore, if there is a possibility for Slovakia to take part of Russian gas from this southern flow, then at least it will diversify things for us.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Radislav Sabo, Slovak television. Mr. Prime Minister, perhaps I could follow...
Shabo Banaslov, Slovak television. Allow me to tell you something. Kiev's decision to stop gas transit not only endangers Slovakia, it also endangers the interests of Hungary. This threatens the security of supply for the entire region. I thank the Prime Minister for trying to find a negotiated solution to this situation, and we thank him on behalf of Hungary. Perhaps this is the place to say that the way the Ukrainians refuse to resolve this through negotiations is simply unacceptable. So, aggressive and hostile statements are coming from Kiev, and these issues cannot be resolved with this. I would like to indicate that Kiev is no longer sitting so securely on the winning side that it can afford this. There are changes taking place in the world that are working against Kiev, weakening its positions. If they remain aggressive and hostile, they will suffer. In the end, they will irritate us, and we will take countermeasures. This is unacceptable, the way Kiev is trying to control and shape relations with Central European countries today. We will give respect, but we expect them to give us respect, and if we raise a serious issue, they will be available to discuss it, as is customary in Europe. But I would like to emphasize that no matter what Brussels says about how Ukraine will become a member of the European Union, Ukraine's EU membership requires a unanimous decision. Slovakia will decide on this, and Hungary will decide on this. And no matter how well it sits, or we think it sits well, in Brussels with the current leadership, we are the members in Brussels, and they are candidates. We shouldn't mix up the positions. They can't act as if the world is whistling, Bratislava, Budapest dancing as if they are whistling. That's impossible. It may have been the case during the American Democratic administration, but that's over. A peaceful era is coming, a different situation. Everyone has to assess their own situation and position. And I have the impression that Kiev has not yet faced the fact that the balance of power has radically changed. And we have to take the Central European countries seriously. Otherwise, not only us, but Kiev will also suffer. So I continue to fully support the efforts of Prime Minister Robert Fico to find a negotiated solution to this difficult issue, the difficult issue of gas transit.
I would also like to add, dear editor, that it was not so long ago that I officially declared that I am not a Ukrainian servant, but a Slovak Prime Minister. And my duty is to protect the national interests of the Slovak Republic and the citizens of the Slovak Republic, naturally taking into account the seriousness of the situation in Ukraine. Frankly, Mr. Prime Minister, I will use his sentence when he stated that today Kiev is no longer sitting as firmly in that seat as it was perhaps during the administration of Mr. President Biden. Mr. Editor, today is probably not a coincidence that the government is being dismissed. Mr. Semeka, as the chairman of the opposition party, opened the topic that we will allegedly threaten and scare the Slovak public with some kind of maiden. When it is impossible to defeat a political opponent in democratic elections, other methods are used. First they want to disable you, then they want to imprison you, then they want to shoot you, then they persuade you to distance yourself from politics. And then, when there are some results of the parliamentary elections, they tend to not respect these results either. As we saw in Georgia or in the first round of the presidential elections in Romania. You know very well that we read something in the National Council today. I am not authorized to inform you about the content of the confidential report prepared by the Slovak Information Service. I can't say names, I can't say circumstances, but I can say with all seriousness that the Slovak opposition is preparing for Maidan. The Slovak opposition is preparing to occupy government buildings, to obstruct the exercise of government power, to cooperate with foreign countries. The Slovak opposition probably didn't notice that the situation in this world has changed significantly. That is why it was very important today at this session of the National Council, again I say this without giving specific data, to state that the Slovak opposition is prepared to disrespect the elections if it loses them, and to try to call early parliamentary elections before the parliamentary elections on the basis of a certain event, for example, that the security forces would take some positions during some protest activities that would violate the laws. The world has changed completely, and our opposition representatives can talk whatever they want, that we are supposedly talking too freely about opening up to the EU and NATO. That is our duty. If we are not prepared for these changes that they are proposing, we will end up very badly. The Prime Minister will acknowledge that one of the first topics that the American president will probably raise will be increasing defense spending. Today we spend 2% of ADP on defense spending, and maybe someone will come and say that unless it is 3 or 4% of ADP, it will not be possible to cooperate. What is the Slovak opposition's answer to NATO? One thing is that there is none because NATO cannot answer. We can answer that. We agree that there may be some increase, but only on the condition that a significant part of defense spending can also be used for dual-purpose projects. And a good example is the initiative of the Minister of Defense of the Slovak Republic and Deputy Prime Minister Robert Kalinak, who is building the most modern hospital we have ever had in the Slovak Republic for 600 million euros from the budget of the Ministry of Defense. So we must be prepared for challenges. And compared to the Slovak opposition, the editor can be not 1, but 10 horse lengths ahead, because I see how incompetent they are, how static they are, how they simply remain in the same positions, and have the feeling that the American embassy in Bratislava or anyone else will handle 2 things for them in Slovakia. If, together with the Prime Minister, we take the position that we are sovereign politicians and not servants, then it is quite natural that we are ready to use the tools that are available to us within the European Union. Let us remember how I was among the politicians who blocked mandatory quotas for migrants. And I in turn remember with great respect the bravery of the Prime Minister on other topics where he vetoed things. There are decisions that require unanimity in the European Union, and therefore anyone who wants to reach a result based on unanimity must take into account that there are countries that may have a different view on some things. The Slovak government supports Ukraine's accession to the European Union. Yes, we do. Of course, under the conditions that must be met. We would not like it if joining the European Union were a purely political decision, as it was in the past for other countries. And now remember, Madam Editor, what I am going to tell you. Those who today most support the war in Ukraine, those who today most stand for Ukrainians, will be most against Ukraine's membership in the European Union, for their own national reasons. We, as the Slovak government and the Slovak Republic, reiterate, support, and want Ukraine to become a member state of the European Union. Of course, provided that the conditions that come into play are met. As for NATO, I no longer have any reason to change my position because I am convinced that NATO membership, as far as Ukraine is concerned, is a point that would completely thwart any idea of peace negotiations. Peace negotiations must be based on the first assumption that Ukraine's NATO membership will be put aside. And then we will talk about other conditions. The Slovak Republic, and sorry, Viktor, I will allow myself, nor Hungary, we are such big players that we can decide whether or not Ukraine will receive an invitation to NATO. But for us, for Slovakia, for my government, while I am here, while I have the opportunity to control the position of Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, I repeat that I will always recommend to the members of the National Assembly of the Slovak Republic, if there is a vote on this in Parliament, that they never agree to Ukraine's membership in NATO, because that is such a security risk for us, for all of us, that I would even describe it as a risk associated with World War III. We are clear about this. The Slovak opposition is clear about something else. The Slovak opposition says that Ukraine should be immediately admitted to NATO. And even the Slovak opposition openly says, and it said this at a meeting in Kiev with President Zelensky, that it is ready to send Slovak soldiers to any armed forces that will probably be part of some peace agreements if these peace agreements are signed. For us, for Slovakia, for the Slovak government, I repeat, I will never agree to sending soldiers to Ukraine because the war in Ukraine is not our war. And we will never accept the rhetoric that we hear here that the EU is at war. We are at war. We are not at war with either Russia or Ukraine. We are a peaceful country. We want peaceful solutions, and we want peaceful coexistence.
As for the NATO issue, Ukraine's NATO membership is not on the agenda and will not be. It will not be on the agenda because there will never be unanimous support for it. It is a communication trick that we are talking about this. There is no point in talking about this. The situation today is that the reason for the Russian-Ukrainian war is that the Russians have made it clear that they are ready to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, even at the cost of war and military aggression. So the question is not whether we want to give Ukraine NATO membership, but whether we want to go to war against Russia. Ukraine's NATO membership means immediate, direct, all-out war against Russia. Is that what we want? Hungary does not want that. We will not send soldiers. We have not even sent weapons. Hungary does not consider it its own war. Everything must be done to ensure peace, and Ukraine's NATO membership is tantamount to war. That is why we do not support it. As for European Union membership, the situation is that if Ukraine were to join the European Union today, it would ruin Hungary. The European Union does not have the money to admit Ukraine into the European Union. And we don't want to ruin our own country. So we won't admit Ukraine to the European Union at the price of ruining the Hungarian economy. We would ruin tens of thousands of Hungarian farms, hundreds of thousands of families, and the money the European Union currently has for economic development should all be given to Ukraine. Do we want to give it to them? Do the Slovaks want to give their money to Ukraine? Or do they want to develop their own country? Therefore, in my opinion, it is worth negotiating Ukraine's membership in the European Union. But this is a process that cannot be concluded for many, many years or even decades. There are no answers today to the question of what European life would be like, how we could protect the standard of living of Slovak, Hungarian, Polish, or even German citizens, while Ukraine is in the European Union. As long as there is no answer to this, it cannot be answered with a yes. We have to work. It is certainly possible to find good answers, but these answers are not yet known. And I will also say that if you allow it, since in the end we will decide, it will not work for Ukraine to anger the citizens of neighboring countries. So if Ukraine speaks to us, Hungarians, the way it speaks, then who will free the Hungarian parliament from any decision that is favorable to Ukraine? Well, those who insult it, those who speak to it as if we were its servants, those representatives will certainly not vote for it. So if Ukraine wants good for itself, then it should sort out its relations with Slovakia, sort out its relations with Hungary, give respect, and behave as a candidate for European Union membership should behave, who asks for it. Today, when I listen to Ukrainian leaders, I hear that they dictate as if they were dictating. They have lost a fifth of their country. Their industry is in ruins. They can't support themselves. And they act like they can dictate to us, when the reality is, they're asking for it. You can't ask like this. You have to know how to ask. This current policy cannot continue.